my team released a big report on fraud in California. What we discovered is that there's somewhere between 180 and $280 billion in fraud in California alone since Gavin Newsom took office.
Net out domestic migration, and has had net out domestic migration. What's different now is that it's now college-educated professionals who are moving out. The primary problem is we don't take care of our own people first. We are too busy taking in the rest of the world.
It sounds like you're defending the welfare state kind of in the way that some of those kind of techno-futurists defend it.
This is getting mean, but I got to be honest here. You look at that, I'm like, what are they doing?
They're getting paid like $200,000 a year.
There are no benefits. It's the stick of the enforcement, and you remove the carrot. You remove the benefit that these people can get.
Lomez is back this week from a much needed and much deserved vacation. And we got to talk about this New York Times piece, how Trump took the U.S. to war with Iran. I thought it was so fascinating. And we've been speculating for a number of weeks of what exactly was the calculation here? How did the decision-making process work? And look, caveats apply. It's the New York Times. It's Maggie Haberman. They may not have all of the details right, but I read the piece. I thought it was pretty stunning. What was your general takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, I read it over the weekend and was trying to sort of integrate that into my understanding of what was going on with the ceasefire and where this article touches on in terms of its emphasis for what we're trying to accomplish with the war. So it's very interesting. We learn a lot. I think some things are being overstated about it, but let's just kind of set up the premise first, which is Maggie Haberman, Jonathan Swan, they get this reporting. It's based on a book called Regime Change about the inner workings of the Trump presidency. There's a lot of, quotes in here and descriptions of these meetings with Netanyahu and various members of the Security Council, Trump's military aides and military advisors about what led to the decision to instigate this military conflict with Iran. And I think what we're seeing here is, at least in part, some people who are close to this decision-making trying to present their own opposition to what's happened and try to distance themselves a little bit from it. So it's hard to separate out a couple of things here. What actually happened on the one hand? Two, what's the New York Times' own spin on what the narrative they want for what happened? And then three, the principles here, what is their spin on what they want to happen? And so disaggregating out what's real, what's not real, what's PR spin is a little bit difficult. So, that's the broad consensus here. And I think my large takeaway actually is that there's four pieces of this conflict. There's the decapitation of the Ayatollah. There's the degradation of Iran's military capabilities, which would include getting rid of their nuclear armament capabilities. Then there's three, which is this uprising, some kind of internal uprising in Iran. And then four, finally, regime change. It looks to me like what the U.S. intended, what Trump intended, was parts 1 and 2. Okay, decapitating the Ayatollah and taking out their military capabilities. What Israel wanted, what Netanyahu wanted, what they were pushing for was 1 and 2, and then also 3 and 4. And so it's that distinction that I think is really important for us to kind of figure out what's going on now as we head into these ceasefire talks.
Yeah, that's right. So just to give kind of a play-by-play, which the piece does quite well, Netanyahu does this high-stakes presentation to Trump and to the assembled officials in the White House in February. And I'll just read a bit of his pitch, because I thought this was really the crux of the piece. And at least in this narrative, it's how things seem to have gone down. It definitely dovetails with what Marco Rubio said initially, was that, hey, the Israelis were going in. We had to make a quick decision, and we decided to join them. So here's the New York Times. Mr. Netanyahu and his team outlined conditions they portrayed as pointing to near certain victory. Iran's ballistic missile program could be destroyed in a few weeks. the regime would be so weakened that it could not choke off the Strait of Hormuz, and the likelihood that Iran would land blows against U.S. interests in neighboring countries was assessed as minimal. Besides, Mossad's intelligence indicated that street protests inside Iran would begin again, and with the impetus of the Israeli spy agency helping to foment riots and rebellion, an intense bombing campaign could foster the conditions for the Iranian opposition to overthrow the regime. The Israelis also raised the prospect of Iranian Kurdish fighters crossing the border from Iraq to open a ground front in the northwest, further stretching the regime's forces and accelerating its collapse. Sounds good to me, Mr. Trump told the prime minister. And look, I'll take kind of the other maximalist side of the case, that it seems like Trump was bought into this, and perhaps not just bought into steps 1 and 2, but 3 and 4. I say that not only from this piece, but actually from the president's statements early on in the war, where he was talking about the collapse of the regime. They were kind of teasing the possibility of what kind of leadership could come next after killing the Ayatollah. And you'll remember that the White House did issue some statements or calls for the Iranian people to rise up against the Ayatollah. And also they were seeding into the narrative, at least in the American press, that there might be this Kurdish incursion and kind of second front coming in from the outside. And so, I don't know. I'm walking away thinking it seems like some of the officials, especially Vice President Vance, said, hey, I don't think, it doesn't seem like we're going to get regime change. This has huge risks. But it seems like the ambiguity is really kind of the key question here. How far did Trump wanted to go? And therefore, even on its own terms, how can we measure success or failure?
Half of you listening aren't subscribed, so please do so now. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and sign up now so you don't miss any of our great content. And also, please share with your friends and family so they can get the same great content as you. Yeah, I want to dispute a little bit of that because I think that gets it a little bit wrong, honestly. And so, concentrating on points 3 and 4, regime change and the uprising. Immediately after that, that plan was given to Donald Trump, and he said exactly what you said. Sounds good to me. Like the whole thing, the whole package. There was this back and forth then with General Kane, Raisin Kane. Marco Rubio was in the room. A day later, Vance was on the phone as well. Ratcliffe. All these people were saying in so many words, this is BS. One person said it was farcical. I think multiple people might have even said it was farcical. And what they meant by that was the specific case of regime change, the specific probability that our airstrikes and taking out the Ayatollah, and again, achieving parts 1 and 2, taking out the Ayatollah and degrading their military capabilities would then inspire immediate uprisings and then regime change. What Trump says to this, and it's in the piece right here, is regime change, he said, would be, quote, their problem. In other words, the Israelis' problem. I don't think from this reporting you can conclude, based on what's said here, that Trump ever bought into this idea that regime change was going to be something that we, the United States, was responsible for. If that was going to happen, my takeaway from this is Trump thought, great, I'd like to see regime change. He may even want it. He may even apply some resources to it, but it's clear to me that what he's saying here is that that's up to Israel to do on their own. We're not going to be a part of that. We just want to achieve 1 and 2. And the other part of the reporting that I think is interesting here is actually that at the end, there was this meeting on February 26th, and there was basically a 24-hour window that Trump had to decide whether or not to take out the Ayatollah. He was given information from the CIA, probably in conjunction with Israeli intelligence, that the Ayatollah was meeting with his top aides somewhere in Tehran. They knew where they were going to be, and they basically had 24 hours to decide if we're going to take these guys out. Trump decides in that 24-hour window that it's possible and that they could do it, and he gives them the okay. So actually, in some sense, there is some ambiguity here about just how, because the narrative that came out immediately after was, did the Israelis sort of twist our arm here? Did we have to go in and do this in that window? It really does seem like to me that while the Israelis might have been doing that on their own, they might have concluded on their own they were going to do it. It certainly looks like here Trump was committed to that action at precisely the time it happened.
Yeah, I think that's probably true as far as the play-by-play, but again, I actually think that this raises, under your theory, this raises an even deeper question, which is, why would you assassinate the Ayatollah and lead a weeks-long bombing campaign in exchange missile fire with the country if you weren't trying to enact a regime change or a kind of bottom-up Iranian counter-revolution? Then actually the calculus gets even more difficult to parse, because you're saying, wait a minute, we're going to execute the leader, engage in an actual open warfare, at least by air, and then how do you know you've won? What do you get at the end?
Yeah.
You've opened up this new problem, which is the Strait of Hormuz closing down. You get the oil prices jacked up. You get this ambiguous ending to the conflict where it appears that the actual regime has solidified control. There's no mass uprising, whereas there was before. And that they've demonstrated that they can withstand a kind of aerial bombardment from the United States of America and install a leader who, look, the Ayatollah, kind of the decapitated Ayatollah was 86.
Sure.
That was going to naturally happen anyways in the matter of years. And so it strikes me as even more bizarre and more inexplicable. Well, the Israeli strategy actually makes more sense in not that I think we should have pursued that strategy, but internally the logic of that strategy
it's a complete narrative.
It's a complete narrative. Yeah. And this is kind of a hanging narrative where you're getting into the second act of the story, and then everyone's trying to scramble and kind of rewrite the story to come up with a satisfying conclusion.
Right.
But the conclusion from the administration since the beginning was always ambiguous. And this leads us into this very bizarre territory where I'm looking at it now. If you were to say the ceasefire holds, this is the new status quo, I'm not sure you can make a persuasive argument that the status quo now, under this theory, is better than the status quo ante for American interests. The Strait is still a disaster. Oil prices are maxed out. We've fought a conflict with an inferior power without actually defeating them decisively. To me, again, at this point, provided that there could change, the story is not making sense to me. The story is not persuasive. And I read this New York Times piece, and I'm saying, actually, J.D. Vance and some of the other officials seem to have predicted all of these problems that are now occurring.
Yeah, look, I think
I'm Vance maxing. I'm Vance pilled. Maybe
Vance comes out very well here. Vance certainly comes out very well here, and I'm heartened to hear the things he was saying echoes precisely both of our concerns and skepticism about this whole affair from weeks before it started up until the very beginning. Okay, so JD Vance is in good company.
He's been listening to the podcast. We know that, right?
So
we know that.
But let's all right. But I actually do think there is a narrative here, actually, from the Trump version that's a better. See, this is where I disagree with you. I actually think Trump's version of this is a better narrative than the Israeli version. I think the Israeli version is farcical. I agree with the assessment. It's farcical. It's stupid. It's not anything that is workable or viable over any kind of meaningful time frame, and it's strictly in Israeli interest and not in American interest. So I am totally uninterested in the Israeli version. What I think Trump and maybe the other staffers who were maybe more sympathetic towards this, and I would include Hegseth obviously in this, is that they were riding high off the success of Venezuela. What happened in Venezuela? Was there some grand plan for the day after, some big regime change where you bring in some like liberal democratic ruler who can now guide Venezuela on the path to Western integration or something? Not really. What you did was you decapitate the ruler. You send a strong message that we are not going to tolerate what they are doing any longer. We're not going to tolerate the way that they are jerking us around with their oil reserves and sort of playing footsie with various adversaries. we're not dealing with that anymore. We're going to take you out, and you're going to now come to the negotiation table, and we're going to find an arrangement that works well for both of us, even if that doesn't include a new regime. And I think they were, hoping this could happen with Iran. You go in, you make some big strike, you take out the Ayatollah, you degrade their weapons. The miscalculation, and I think this is what's clear in this piece, the miscalculation was that they thought by taking out all this weaponry and by decapitating the Ayatollah, they would be in a position of submission and they wouldn't be able to close the Strait of Hormuz in the way that they have done. Okay? That was the part that just didn't make it into the calculation, or that was the risk assessment. I'm sure there was some kind of risk assessment. And look, when you're doing a risk,
but even in the piece, though, let's stay for a minute on the Hormuz piece, because Netanyahu told him in February the regime would be so weakened that it could not choke off the Strait of Hormuz. But subsequently, J.D. Vance and others warned the president, actually, the Strait is really hard to manage. It's going they can choke it off. And so doesn't it seem like the president and look, the president seems surprised at the actual conclusion. So can't we conclude or infer that the president bought Netanyahu's version more than J.D. Vance's version of the story?
On the Strait of Hormuz, yes, and I think that's where the miscalculation was for sure. And and this is what I said. I was on with Andrew Colvett and Blake Neff on the Charlie Kirk Show earlier this week, and one thing I'm seeing here with Trump, and this is Trump all along, has been throughout his presidency, is you make some big bets. Okay, this was coming off a big bet they made in Venezuela, and they won. That was a big jackpot that they won and got to take home. They had a set of cards in their hands. Trump thought he had a winning hand here. He can go in and take out the Ayatollah. He can wipe out their weapons, and we'll be in a much better situation. It'll happen in a matter of a few weeks, and then we're good. We get to the negotiating table, and things are going to run a lot more smoothly than they had previously. That was the bet. We are learning a month and change, month and a half, whatever it is, into this conflict, that is not the case. So what is Trump doing? Well, folding the hand, okay? We can't control the Strait of Hormuz, so we're going to go to the negotiating table, and we're going to figure that out so that these long-term consequences that everyone's worried about as it relates to the global economy, as it relates to oil prices, don't tank everything else that we want to do. And I think, the administration shouldn't spin it this way, and I don't expect them to spin it this way. There are ways to talk about this where it looks like victory in some sense 6 months from now. But what I'm seeing is somebody who has made the calculation now going into this new phase of the war that we can't achieve the things we wanted to achieve when we set out. So we're going to take what we can out of it, and we're going to cut our losses where they are. To me, that's fine. That's a much better situation and a much better approach to these questions than a president or an executive who goes into a big unknown situation, a big war, let's say in the Middle East, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan. You start to see some resistance to your plan, and rather than back away and reassess and maybe pull back and cut your losses, you just go deeper in and commit yourself to a multi-year, exponentially more costly situation. So, look, am I happy this happened? No, I wasn't happy to begin with. But the thesis was always, if and when we needed to pull out and cut our losses, we could. And basically, that's what I'm seeing now. And I think that's okay. I think that's what a good executive ought to do. So, okay, maybe this is cope, but I think it's basically fine. And okay, yeah. Okay, is it cope? Am I coping?
No, I don't think you're coping. I think you're rationalizing, kind of a post facto rationalization, which again is fine. But I'm not sure that this is actually the conclusion, right? There are still people that are going on air that are demanding for further military action, that are persuading the president that what he needs to do is take Karg Island, which is like an 80s movie ending to this, which I know is really appealing to Trump. Like we're going to take Karg Island, we're going to send in the paratroopers, we're going to secure the facility, and then U.S. Marines will be essentially the gas station attendants of the Middle East, and we'll be collecting the cash. I really hope they don't try to do that. That seems to me like opening up an entirely new phase of the conflict. I think the tweets that people got worked up about over Easter were largely negotiating bluster.
Definitely.
I don't think he ever intended to end their civilization or to bomb all of their power plants and water facilities and other civilian infrastructure. I don't think he was going to do that. I rested quite easy just saying that's just Trump's rhetorical bluster. But I guess like I agree with you. Like at this point, okay, they did this thing. They've moved on it. The thesis has not turned out. It was rested on some faulty assumptions. What do you do now? The ceasefire is good. Trying to negotiate an exit is good. But it does seem like we've now opened up the possibility, a non-zero possibility, that this thing will escalate over time.
Yeah.
That we will be drawn into further conflict. And I guess like my kind of metaphor or the visual reference that I'm thinking about. You've seen the great film Patton, right?
Yeah.
There's that great opening speech with the huge American flag, and General Patton gives this rah-rah speech about kind of tough guy Americans going in and winning. And it's like this idea of being a winner. And I'm reminded that this was Richard Nixon's favorite film when he was president in the White House. And Nixon pumped himself up by watching Patton, I believe, 3 times, leading up to his order to execute a huge kind of bombing campaign in the Vietnam War. And so I'm always like fearful, and this is why I think I didn't like some of the memes that were coming out of the White House, the administration, the Department of War, where they were presenting it as a kind of 80s movie or video game. They were presenting it in that kind of imagery. Hegseth, again, who I think has done a good job, has come across as kind of a Patton-esque figure, just always pushing to blow things up, almost for the sake of blowing things up.
Yeah.
And so I do worry that this nexus of kind of Netanyahu trying to secure his interests, Hegseth as the kind of Patton figure, and Trump as the kind of 80s action hero plot device, I do worry that we will end up in a worse place in 3 to 6 months. And I do hope that the calmer heads, and look, from the reporting, I was really impressed with the vice president. I hope that calmer heads are able to prevail.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned 80s movies. The one I actually had in my mind, I was thinking about like Lethal Weapon, okay? And it's like the maverick cop. It's, Mel Gibson's character, Riggs or whatever. And there's like some low-level drug bust, okay? And he's going to go like take out the like criminal. And in order to do this, he like takes, he steals some guy's car. He's like driving recklessly through these intersections. Cars are crashing all around him. Like people's lives are in danger. There's like a shootout in a, suburban mall somewhere. And he like finally gets the guy and you're like, what are you doing? And, he's like, he's got the criminal, he's got the Ayatollah. But you're like, you just put, the entire city at risk. And, there's all this damage and destruction around you. And this is the thing, like when you're dealing with Mel Gibson and Lethal Weapon, when you're dealing with Riggs, like he's going to do a lot of things that are really positive and get the guy, he's going to get the bad guy. But also you got to deal with the fact that he's going to do it in his own sort of explosive way, so to speak. But okay, I mean, it's not a perfect analogy. I do think we can walk away from this. And it like, again, it's actually, I do think it's going to be fine. There are reasons to be concerned about ongoing conflicts and about what Israel wants to do in particular. And I do think what this reporting suggests and what has been sort of creeping in the background all along is that Israel's interests do not align one-to-one with the United States interests. And we really have here reached this juncture where it's very clear that our interests do not include any further engagement, do not include what Trump says here about regime change, that's their problem. And I hope he sticks to that message. Not our monkey, not our circus, okay? This is your thing now. Will we potentially get dragged into it? I think only if we signal that we're willing to be dragged into it. If we make a hard and strong case and signal very clearly that we're not taking this any further, that we're committed to reaching a negotiated settlement with Iran, then we can be done with this. We have what's going on in Lebanon right now, creating problems that could escalate into something larger. And of course, our other allies in the region, I don't think want anything to do with further escalation. So now's the time to take our foot off the gas and clean this mess up and move on and go to what's next for this administration, which is focusing on the domestic agenda. Okay, that's my preference here, and that's what I think most voters want to see.
Okay, great. Yeah, not only do I agree with you, but you've done a perfect segue for the next story. And I know you were on vacation last week and just catching up, but my team released a big report on fraud in California. And it seems like, again, Vice President Vance is leading this anti-fraud task force. There's this huge public narrative that started from the Somali fraud reporting, is now migrated into this California fraud reporting. But we found through public documents, dozens of interviews, I had 4 reporters working on the story for about 2 months. And what we discovered is that there's somewhere between 180 and $280 billion in fraud in California alone since Gavin Newsom took office. And so this seems to me like a natural political winner. And whereas the Iran war is at best a 50-50 issue with high downside risk, portraying Minnesota and New York and California and other bastions of blue governance as havens of outright fraud, ripping off taxpayers, seems like the kind of domestic policy agenda, along with immigration, along with a couple of other issues, that can be a winner, both substantively, obviously nobody likes fraud, but also politically, because this is at heart a 90-10 issue.
Absolutely. It's just so obvious. It's such a good thing for us to be focusing our attention on. Not just because it's a huge problem that we need to eradicate from our public life and is creating all sorts of downstream pathologies that are making everyday life, just more difficult for ordinary Americans, but because it also demonstrates from a sort of more crude political perspective, the problems of democratic governance, because this is not just California, as you said, it's anywhere we see these, entrenched Democratic politicians and Democratic infrastructure, places like Minnesota. I'm sure, Chris, I know you're busy in California, but once you sweep up California, I hope someone sends you off to Chicago and you can clean up whatever's going on in Illinois. If not you, maybe we can find some other enterprising investigative journalist to go do this because, and maybe you can tell us how this is done. But my hunch is it's actually not that difficult. A guy like Nick Shirley just takes a camera, finds some public documentation, and just goes and knocks on some doors, and you can uncover that easily, hundreds of millions, if not billions, in fraud. And so, yes, this is the best message for the GOP and for Republicans going forward. I think not San Francisco, but California generally is a unique case because of the scale. And highlighting what's going on in California sort of stains everything else that's going on across the country. So I'm glad we're doing it there. But yes, this is a problem that is everywhere and that, I think is more than just medical fraud. This is about all sorts of infrastructural problems. And we can see it like in California. I'm a former California resident, as are you. California has, despite being, one of the nicest places to live in the country, has net out domestic migration and has had net out domestic migration for the last decade, if not longer. What's different now is that it's now college-educated professionals who are moving out for all sorts of reasons. So people are voting with their feet on this. And so, yes, this is all just to say this is an obvious winner.
Yeah, I think the last point is really interesting. And there's two stats that we came across in this reporting that I think are really important. One is actually under Gavin Newsom, the state's population has declined by 0.2%, which is the first time that California's population has declined ever since it became a state. So that's important. But at the same time that the population declined, Medicaid spending, kind of state medical programs for low-income people, doubled. And so you have the population going down and then the healthcare expenses under Medicaid doubling. And you're looking at that, and HHS officials said, hey, about 25% of that budget is just fraud in their best estimates. And so you also ask, like, all right, well, who's benefiting from this? Well, the medical system. And then who's benefiting from the medical system? The unions. And so at all of the points of convergence, you see part of this is just the unions are taking their cut. They cycle it to the politicians. The politicians cycle money back into the system. And so you're seeing that process play out over and over. And then you're looking at the decision tree, and I'm curious to hear about your personal experience having left, after I did. But you're looking at the decision tree for like professional class people that are making, let's say, six-figure household income or higher. And you're saying, like, wait a minute, I'm getting taxed at 50%. The costs are out of control. And either you're rich enough where it doesn't really matter, or you're poor enough where it doesn't really matter because you have every part of your life subsidized.
Yeah,
and I think that's why people are saying, I'm out. This actually doesn't make any sense. And I don't like, how this tax money is being used.
Yeah. And I mean, not only did I live in California, I was also part of a public sector union at one point. And I was actually quite involved in public sector union politics. That's maybe a whole another story that we can cover at another time. But the important thing that I observed was that middle class families, especially who were, millennial aged and younger, because of the way that housing prices really started to outpace salaries and incomes for middle class professionals, and how badly the recession sort of distorted the career development for people of a certain age and younger, all started to move out, and how small businesses are just getting crushed across the board. I have family members who are dealing with insane regulatory policies that are crushing their small businesses. I had neighbors when I lived in Southern California who owned small businesses who were pushed out. This is of course all anecdotal, but in the housing condo complex my wife and I first lived in when we were starting our family, we were of course renters. So was everyone else around there. We were all renters, renting from, boomer aged landlords. All the middle-class families who were there all left. We were the last to leave. So it wasn't just a COVID phenomenon because we left during COVID. They were leaving much before COVID. And I have to say what it was being replaced with was foreign nationals. So the condo complex, all of the Californians who were there left to go to other states. They went to Texas. They went to, the Northwest. They went to Tennessee. A lot of them went to Florida, Las Vegas. They left. They went to the desert states, the Sunbelt states. And what came in were, just to be very frank about it, foreign nationals. And this is what's going on with California's population. The native population, the domestic population is leaving and is being replaced by immigrants. And the only reason that California is only losing 0.2% or whatever the number you said was because of net in international migration. So it's domestic out, international in. And, this is bad. This is not how our state should be functioning. This is not how our country should be functioning. And you can try to sort out what are the reasons for all this, who's responsible, where is the money going, where is the graft happening, why are taxes so outrageous? But the bottom line is when that is the dynamic, Americans leaving, foreigners replacing them, then something has gone badly wrong and it needs to get fixed.
Yeah, that's right. And So let's talk about one of the programs that we really dug into this week. It's called IHSS, and it's one of those programs that kind of goes under the radar, but is actually approximately 10% of the state's budget. And it's created the single largest occupation statewide, which is in-home caregiver. It's totally subsidized by taxpayers, federal taxpayers, and then the state administers it. But under Gavin Newsom, the state is spending now $30 billion a year, paying 800,000 people to take care mostly of their own relatives and live-in family members. And so, look, on the one hand, it's billed as a compassionate program that allows people to get paid by the state to take care of the elderly or disabled or young kids that have some kind of physical or emotional or mental disability. But under the surface, experts say, and this dates back to the Schwarzenegger administration, where they were raising the alarm, saying between 20 and 40% of the program is just people committing fraud. Because it's in people's homes, it's just all on the honor system. Self-reported time cards, self-reported disabilities, kind of self-reported hours and claims on state cash. And I want to play you a clip. And this is like widespread. There's hundreds of these clips floating around. People advising others how to, at best, secure benefits, and at worst, how to game the system. So let's roll this clip from TikTok.
Look, if your child has some kind of disability or some kind of something, including autism, sign that up for IHSS. I was able to get my son on IHSS at the age of 3 years old, okay? How? Because he's autistic. I don't know what level yet. I'm pretty sure this is a level 2 or 3, because this needs the utmost supervision. And supervision is a part of IHSS. So now you work from home, just be at home and watch this little right here and make sure he's okay, this, that, and the third. Also, for personal hours, you can get an add to that, baby. You can get...
And so this individual and many other individuals, you can earn about $60,000 a year. That's totally tax-free. And you can also collect other benefits. And so some of these videos were people stacking kind of tax-free public benefits on top of IHSS. And then you're starting to clear, $100,000 a year. You get home subsidies, you get food subsidies, you get diaper subsidies, you get in-home care subsidies. And so, I mean, what is your reaction as someone that works for a former Californian, works for a living? Like, what's your reaction?
All right. This is I have a sort of counterintuitive take here. Okay. Maybe I'm just revealing myself to just be like an arch lib at bottom. Okay. Just, peel off all the sort of superficial sort of right-wing beliefs. And there's just a lib underneath. But I'm watching this video and I'm thinking to myself, okay, yeah, this woman, to take care of her, I guess, autistic son or whatever it is getting like $60,000 a year, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. And I'm thinking, okay, I mean, that's fine. Like, do I expect this person to be a productive part of like the, modern economy? I mean, we are always going to have some layer of underclass that is going to either depend on some kind of public assistance or I don't know what. I mean, they live in like little hovels on like street corners and in sort of favelas, and they, scrounge for food by, hunting or trapping like mice or something. Like, I don't want that either. Okay, I want us to be able to take care of people who aren't going to be able to participate in their economy at like a bare minimum. They should have like a bare minimum. I do like the safety net. I'm like basically okay with this. Okay.
Okay.
The problem is
you would draw the line at fraud, though, right? I mean,
yeah,
I don't think
it's
that this
fraudulent,
person
sure,
arguably is not committing fraud, but people who are just falsifying it, faking it, submitting false time cards.
And the problem is like tons of people are taking advantage of the system, and there's tons of fraud. What I believe is there's always going to be some amount of fraud. You can't get rid of all the fraud. But it's like basically fine that this program exists. The problem is, one, the fraud. So that's true. The problem is the fraud. And the problem, too, is that we aren't just taking care of our own people. We have millions and millions of people in California who are also, I'm sure, benefiting from these kinds of programs who are not citizens, who don't have a right to our public largesse, who don't have a right to benefit from the inheritance of American industry and American wealth. And so the problem is not that there are these programs that these people benefit from. And like, yes, we can tinker around the margins and sort of figure out the right way to get the people the help they need that, maximizes the efficiencies in the system and reduces all of the fraud and the extra people who are taking advantage and so on. And we should have really harsh penalties for the people who are taking advantage. But that to me is not the primary problem. The primary problem is we don't take care of our own people first. We are too busy taking in the rest of the world. And so, of course, like I'm an immigration hawk first, so everything comes back to my hobby horse. But that is how, at least in this context, in the problem of California, I am thinking about this.
Okay, so let me try to understand your position. You're actually, doesn't sound like you're actually defending, let's say, the welfare state on liberal grounds, because you recognize that it's rife with fraud, it's abused by foreigners,
oh, yeah.
It's kind of impossible to police. It sounds like you're defending the welfare state kind of after the fact, kind of in the way that some of those kind of techno-futurists defend it, which is to say, in a world of kind of high cognition, demanding employment, in order to get above that threshold, you have to have a certain baseline aptitude.
Yeah.
And for people below that threshold, there should be some kind of universal UBI. Am I
basically? I mean, it like comes close to that. And like the thing is, when you work in public sector spaces, you see all of the waste that is happening anyway. And people who do have like jobs, but don't do any productive work. So the state's still paying them. They're just paying them to have like a bright colored vest on and sit on a chair while the people who do the actual work like do the work. But for every person who's doing the actual work, there's like 10 people with bright colored vests on who just sit there on their phones and like, are on Snapchat or whatever. If that person,
I think you had Stockholm syndrome. That's what's happening. You have public employee Stockholm syndrome. You haven't fully recovered. Because I hear that, I get so angry.
When's the last time you spent any time in an airport? They just sit, they're just milling around. They sit around and like go. I was in California last week. Okay, that's where I was vacationing. I'm in California. I was like I had to take some public transport. I was taking the BART. Okay, for those of you who aren't from Northern California.
Oh yeah,
I was on the BART train.
The Ashby BART station, my home station. Yeah.
I go to the BART station and I got like all these kids with me and I'm trying to make it through and I'm trying to figure out how to get the tickets and like the phone thing isn't working. So I'm trying to get the tickets and the kids are screaming. And there's 10, we count 10 people at the like BART, little booth, the ticket booth. Okay. 10 employees with BART little insignias on their jackets. There was exactly one guy out of the 10 who finally, after watching us like struggle for minutes, comes out and finally helps out. The other 9, excuse me, were all on their phones. They were just sitting there. Like they weren't even talking to each other. They're just sitting there milling around some of them weren't even on their phones. They're like half sentient. I'm sorry, this is getting mean, but I got to be honest here. You look at them, I'm like, what are they doing? They're just standing there. Their eyes are open. They're like, they have, the broom in their hand, or the one of them, has something in her hand. They're just standing there with their like backs against the machine that, by the way, don't work. None of the ticket machines work. So they're just standing there with their backs against the ticket machines, and they're just like looking down at their phones, or just kind of like nodding their heads, like half sentient, half there. They're getting paid, whatever it is, $70,000 a year.
No, they're getting paid like $200,000 a year
with a
because
pension,
they're doing a couple overtime hours.
Exactly,
yeah.
With a pension, with all sorts of benefits that far exceed whatever that woman is getting. So I'm sitting here asking myself, what's the better scenario? That woman making the TikTok video, she's home watching her kids. That's something. Okay. At least she's home watching her kids. They're probably all sitting around watching, cartoons or whatever. But, look, who am I to judge? My kids sit around and watch cartoons sometimes too. So she's home watching her kids. What is the value of the person with their leg up against the broken BART machine where the tickets don't work, and when someone needs help, they can't help. They don't even know how, and they don't care. Okay, so all right, I'm being very cynical right now, but
okay. What you need though is you need the World War II generation attitude, which was you have to work hard, you have to be a good steward of public funds, you have to be kind of obsessively focused with improving the system that employs you. And the deal, especially with public employees, which are highly compensated, kind of showered with benefits, have extremely high job security, it should be a minimum expectation of quality. And all of this talk, it like turns me. It's like a kind of anime where they like grab their fists and their anger like turns them into some sort of creature, and it's like I feel like I'm turning into that creature, but I'm just turning into a libertarian, where it's like, you know what, just zero everything out, and you know what, people will figure it out.
Let the chips fall where they may.
People are resourceful.
No,
they'll figure it out.
The problem is,
and actually, no, it's not that cognitively demanding to be a janitor at a Greyhound station. You can do it, but you're not doing it because we're paying you not to do it.
Okay,
and because
that
you don't
may be
have
true.
to do it.
But we actually only
need
like one janitor, and there are 10 people to fill that spot. And like, you're right, people are resourceful. But the problem is, if you go down the libertarian lane. Okay, this is going to work like in some places. But you know what happens when you do this in California, in Northern California, where I'm from, when I drive around and see what negligence produces? It produces what amounts to favelas in the street. Okay, it produces these like tent communities that are lining, these big roads in like Oakland. And it's the third world. Okay, it's people become drug addicts. They become homeless. They go down the route of like vice jobs and prostitution, and their kids are neglected. So I don't know, man. Libertarianism.
I totally disagree. Totally disagree. I think you have it actually exactly backwards. No, actually, the same kind of beneficent welfare state created those favelas. And so if you look at homelessness spending and homelessness and street crime, street disorder, street encampments, those things go up together, and actually they're highly correlated. And when we weren't spending that money, when we didn't have the homeless industrial complex, when you and I were growing up, you would never see those encampments. They were limited to very few places. The Tenderloin, parts of downtown Oakland, parts of kind of near the railroad track in Sacramento. There were these Skid Row in Los Angeles. There were these tiny places. There was always an end of a line. But actually, the welfare state paradoxically creates that kind of community formation. Yeah. And if you were to just get rid of it all, I actually think that, look, not all those people, a lot of those people that are out in the streets committing crimes, they need to be in jail. That's the kind of community that would be best. Yeah. But I actually think that you'd see the opposite occur.
Yeah, I'll grant you that. I think, okay, let me revise my position on this, because I think actually you bring up a good point here. And it's, you don't, it's the old trope about you don't have to be faster than the bear. You just got to be faster than your friend. Okay. And there's, so actually a good corollary to this is what happened in the Netherlands with Somali immigration. So they were packed into these, like apartments, and they were coming into the Netherlands and Amsterdam. And at some point, the Netherlands said, we're not doing this anymore. We're not offering free stuff anymore. And so where did they all go? Well, they just went to the place where there was free stuff. Okay. The Netherlands just has to outrun the other sort of, Northern European countries. And that's what happened. And maybe, what we have to do is we just have to outrun Canada. Okay. So if Canada wants to descend into a hyper progressive welfare state, then so be it. Okay. They will all just go to Canada. So I do think that's right. And so, okay, I'm going to revise this. Can we get California to the point where, one, you have strict law and order, and in other words, there's zero tolerance for this kind of vagrancy. The moment and this is what other states have done really successfully. The moment there's vagrancy anywhere, you just bring the full force of law down on them, and you just get them out. You get them out of the streets by hook or by crook, any way you can. That's part one. Part two is there are no benefits. It's the carrot, or it's the stick of the enforcement, and you remove the carrot. You remove the benefits that these people can get. And, yes, hopefully they go to Canada. Still though, I'm going to stick to my, should I stick to my earlier point? Okay, for now, I'm going to stick to my earlier point as a gesture of grace that we do, want to take care of the least off. There is a way to do this. And honestly, I think we ought to. I think it's fine. And it doesn't actually violate any kind of, ideological, axiom or imperative about, the economy or capitalism or how you produce wealth to take care of your least off. So I'm going to hold on to a little bit of non-libertarian sort of grace in my heart to say that, yeah, it's fine. It's fine in a highly advanced economy that requires a lot out of its people, out of its productive people in particular. And there's only so many janitors that you need. And even then, I don't know how much longer we're going to need a lot of janitors, truthfully. We still want to keep some money around and some resources around to take care of our people and try to guide them towards better living, towards better choices. So this isn't to say that we want to encourage vice. And this is where the other part of the equation comes in that I think libertarians get wrong. You have to also create guide rails for people who can't handle the same kind of cognitive load. Okay, they can't be subjected to and encouraged and enticed by all of the different vices that might be available to them to ruin their lives. They have to be given opportunities and have to be shown the right path in order to make good decisions and make good out of perhaps what little they have and still be productive to whatever extent they can. Okay, that's I think my final say on this.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. We'll meet halfway. And so what I would suggest, and one way to think about it is, we have a kind of maternalist welfare state, but we actually need a more paternalistic welfare state. I
like this. Sure.
So and on that, I will concede, yes, there is a role for the state. We can't roll back the welfare state from the 1960s and 1930s. It's impossible to get the libertarian outcome. So can you improve it, simplify it, make it more direct to people, and then load those values into it in a paternalistic way? Paternalism is not bad. Paternalism in this case is good. All right, last story of the day. Let's talk about the Dignity Act. How can you oppose dignity? What kind of hateful creature are you? What is the Dignity Act, and why does Lomez, I'm guessing 100%, opposes it?
Listen, Chris, first of all, it's the Dodd Act, okay? This is not the Dignity Act.
Wait, is it really?
It is really the Dodd Act. This was
Dignidad.
Yeah, sorry, I can't even say it right.
Yeah, the Spanish.
I mean, this dovetails with the previous controversy. Okay, quickly, the Dodd Act was an attempt by, believe it or not, Republican legislators. Maria Salazar from Florida, I believe, was the sponsor of this bill all the way back in July of last year. It's gaining ground, gaining attention because more and more Republicans are beginning to co-sponsor this bill. And recently, the great Brandon Gill of Texas has, called this out for what it is, which is basically the same old thing that Republicans have been doing all the way back to the Gang of Eight, which is a sort of veiled amnesty deal as a way to resolve our immigration crisis and try to find some compromise with the Democrats on this. So what Dignidad does, in short, is it provides basically a tier 1 amnesty to something like 3 million dreamers. So if you came into the country, I think before the deadline is 2021 and you were under the age of 18, you get amnesty so long as you check off a few pretty easy to check off boxes. And the only thing required for you to make the claim that you were here ahead of time is to have 2 people say that you were. Okay. And so this is really easy to game. And I'm sure the numbers will be in vast excess of the people who are really authentically and legally eligible for this. There's a second and even more insidious tier 2 amnesty that is not quite strict amnesty, but provides work visas for something like 12 million illegals who came in before 2021 with the same ability not only to game the system, but also they have access to what amounts to chain migration. So spouses and dependents get to come along for the ride with them, which could basically double the amount of people that are ultimately granted amnesty under this bill. And wait, there's more. There's a third tier to this, which is that STEM graduates, okay, quote unquote high skilled labor, though there is no strict salary minimum that they need to meet in order to qualify for this accelerated work visa situation. These STEM graduates will also get visas. It will also, by law, clear all visa backlogs after a 10-year wait period. Basically, what this is a workaround for Indian H-1Bs. And the reason I say that is because India as a country are the only people who would ever reach this 10-year backlog wait. So by 2035, essentially what would happen is about 1 million plus Indian workers who are some combination of H-1Bs and STEM graduates and temporary work visas and so on would get their visas automatically acknowledged and approved. Okay, so what this would do in aggregate, basically what you're looking at is not only these amnesty features, but this would regularize over a 10-year period a 55% increase in legal immigration as well, who of course will 10 years from now will have this same argument all over again, and we'll go through the exact same amnesty arguments, and all these people will be amnestied in. So for anybody who's interested in immigration, this is a total non-starter. This is nothing like what any of the Trump people want. And we got to go back to the drawing board and put a ton of pressure on any Republicans who even go near this. Stay far away from this. Total disaster, total mistake. Never can happen.
So what are I'm just going to ask you questions because you're right into this. Has the president issued any statement about this? Has
No.
the majority leader? I mean, is this thing have a real chance of making it through with Democrat support? Like, what is the actual legislative prospect for this?
Yeah,
piece?
it's sort of hard to say. I mean, this thing's kind of been hidden from public view. Like I said, this has been out there floating around since July. I first came across it reading our, great friends at the Center for Immigration Studies. They've been writing about this since last summer. As far as I was concerned, this was a non-starter. It's just like one of these things that gets thrown out there. I haven't heard anything from the administration, from the White House on this. Maria Salazar, I believe, has a press conference scheduled for April 16th. So sometime next week, she's going to make her big public push for this. In the meantime, she's gotten a lot of Republicans to sign on, many of whom are either on their way out, they're just retiring, or, for various reasons having to do with their constituencies, or they're just like soft. Okay. And they've always been soft on this issue. And so this is being pitched as a non-amnesty thing. Of course, they're throwing in some crumbs about border security and so on. But Listen, all that stuff is always part of these packages. And what always happens here is the amnesty comes first and the border enforcement and the anti-immigration stuff comes never. Okay? That is always how this works. It's always going to be how this works. This is like I said, a total non-starter. As far as I know, there hasn't been much support for this, any broad public support for this. There hasn't been a big public push for it, but you can see it happening right now, and we just need to nip this in the bud.
Yeah, that seems right. And look, I mean, it's also just the 180 kind of mirror opposite of what the president campaigned on and what people voted for. And so, yeah, I've seen videos, Maria Salazar kind of in a very animated manner, promoting this legislation, kind of lashing out at Republican colleagues who've criticized her on this legislation. It seems very personal to her. And this is like a George W. Bush era idea that was not able to get off the ground. And this was also a 2012 postmortem idea. I mean, this idea has been kind of snaking around Republican circles for a long time. And my anticipation is that actually the majority of Republican legislators and the supermajority of Republican voters just don't want it. And so I expect that it will not make it through, and I agree that it shouldn't make it through. Do we have any other, last question for you as our in-house border hawk, immigration czar? The border czar of the Rufo and Lomez podcast. This is your new title.
Happy to play that part.
Deportations. Are they still happening? Are they slowing down? What's the latest on deportations?
Yeah, they are. They're happening quietly. I mean, as people know, Kristi Noem's out at DHS. Mark Wayne Mullen's making his way in. So there are some changes at the top, and things are kind of, as that transition's happening, things are, a little bit slower. There's been some language from the White House about the nature of these deportation efforts. And the truth is they haven't been particularly publicly popular. And those of us who are immigration hawks have to face that reality head on and understand that there are some PR headwinds about how these deportation measures have been undertaken so far. And what that means is let's go back to the drawing board. Let's figure out a way to do this that doesn't create these kinds of domestic political headwinds. So they're still happening. Immigration is still at net zero, if not net negative, still going into 2026. So things are still, it's not like there's been some 180. I think what the administration's trying to do is just be a little bit more sort of quiet about it, a little more subtle with these efforts, which I think is probably a good thing overall. And we'll let the numbers speak for themselves. And I think actually that's what the public wants. I mean, largely what the public wants is they want to do this. They don't want to see it. Okay. And this is just something we know about public perception. It is what it is. And we got to work within those constraints.
Yeah, I think our initial chats about this, going back to Renee Good and Alex Preddy, these kind of flashy examples of the ICE raids in Minnesota. It seems like on all fronts, the administration is following some of the sage counsel coming from the show. They've kind of dialed it back, and again, you want people to just quietly leave the country because for paperwork and financial reasons, it becomes less tenable for them, and they make the decision to go. You can give them plane tickets. You can support kind of the exit, make it easier through the app. It does seem like this is good, and I do think it was absolutely the right decision to get rid of Kristi Noem, not just because she was really just kind of blundering as a leader, and also maybe this will give her and her husband a little time to sort through some of the things they have going on.
Priorities.
Okay, so that is a wrap. Such an interesting week. Really glad to have you back. I don't think California has totally kind of re-corrupted you since you've been gone. I still love it there, man. I really do. I love San Francisco. I love it. And I know.
We gotta fix it, man. We're gonna fix it.
I'd go
make
back
it better so we can go back.
If we could solve these problems, I would go back. Would you go
city.
back?
Oh yeah, I love that city. I love it. It's one of my favorite places in the world. So we're gonna solve that problem. And next week
we're gonna take it back.
Can we not talk about Iran, please? Let's find something else. Let's talk about the farmers. Our American farmers have gone through some tough times. I want to spend some time talking about the farmers. Maybe we can do that next week. What do you think?
Yeah, we will talk about the farmers next week. And I am a farmer. Did you know this?
I did know this because,
Yeah.
you know, can I say
file a
I've
Schedule F.
been to your house? I've like seen,
been to
I've
my
seen
house,
the Rufo
yeah.
farm. Yeah.
The farm is building up nicely. We are filing the Schedule F, so we're officially small farmers. Yeah, it's a big deal.
So you're participating in some of this, you know, quasi legal, you know, squeezing out everything you can from the state. Okay, that's fine. I don't blame you. I don't blame you.
America, they support, the government supports our great farmers.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, all right. Well, we'll talk that next week, and good to see you. And
all right, Chris.
Until then.
Bye.
Bye.